Guitarist failed audition, about to leave. Jimi, wait, ever played bass? The Jimi Hendrix Experience was born. September 1966, London. A small rehearsal space in Denmark Street, the heart of London's music industry, known as Tin Pan Alley, where music publishers, instrument shops, and rehearsal studios lined both sides of the narrow street. This was where British rock and roll was being created. The Beatles had bought guitars here. The Rolling Stones had rehearsed in these rooms. Now it was hosting auditions for a new band that nobody had heard of yet. Chas Chandler had just brought Jimi Hendrix to England from New York 3 weeks earlier, convinced he'd found the next big thing, the artist who would revolutionize rock music. But Jimi needed a band. He needed musicians who could keep up with him, who could handle his unconventional approach to rock music, who wouldn't be intimidated by his talent or try to compete with it. Chas had placed an ad in Melody Maker, the weekly music newspaper that every serious musician in Britain read religiously, the Bible of the UK music scene. Experienced guitarist needed for new rock band, serious players only, good pay for right person. They'd been auditioning guitarists all week. Dozens had come through. Some were technically proficient, but boring, playing like they were taking an exam. Others had the right attitude and stage presence, but couldn't play well enough to keep up with Jimi. None had the chemistry Jimi was looking for, that indefinable quality that makes a band work. Noel Redding showed up on a Thursday afternoon, September 29, 1966. He was 20 years old with a massive mop of curly red hair that made him look like he'd stuck his finger in an electrical socket. He'd been playing guitar since he was 8 years old, started on an acoustic his father had lying around, taught himself by listening to records and figuring out chords. He'd been in several small bands throughout his teenage years, most recently a group called The Loving Kind that had gotten a few local gigs in Kent, but had gone nowhere commercially. He was broke, living in a tiny flat in Folkestone about 70 miles from London, making barely enough money to eat by working part-time at his father's shop. This audition, with a new band forming in London, was his chance to maybe, finally, make it in music.
The train fare to London had cost him £2 he couldn't really afford. He'd borrowed £5 from his mother for the trip, promising he'd pay it back when he made it big. She'd smiled sadly, the way mothers do when they love their children but don't believe in their dreams. Noel walked into the rehearsal space carrying his guitar case, nervous but trying to hide it behind a facade of casual confidence. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and amplifier tubes, the smell of every rehearsal space in Britain. Chas Chandler was there, looking imposing as always. He'd been the bassist for The Animals, one of the biggest British invasion bands, so he had credibility. And sitting in the corner, tuning a white Stratocaster, was Jimi Hendrix. Noel had heard about Jimi. Word was spreading through London's music scene about this American guitarist Chas had discovered, this guy who could supposedly do things with a guitar that nobody had seen before. But looking at him now, Jimi just seemed quiet, focused on his tuning. Not particularly intimidating. "You're Noel?" Chas asked. "Yes, sir." "Let's hear you play." "You know Hey Joe?" Noel knew it. It was a standard, a folk rock song that several bands had covered. He took out his guitar, plugged into the amp Chas pointed to, and started playing. He played competently. The chords were right, the rhythm was steady. He wasn't Dad, but he wasn't special either. He was just another decent guitarist in a city full of decent guitarists. Jimi listened for about 30 seconds, and started playing along on his Stratocaster, and suddenly Noel understood what people had been talking about. Jimi took the simple chord progression Noel was playing and transformed it. He added flourishes that shouldn't have worked but did. He bent notes in ways that created colors and textures Noel didn't know guitars could make.
Noel tried to keep up, but it was like trying to race a sports car while riding a bicycle. He wasn't in the same league, not even close. After about 2 minutes, Jimi stopped playing. Chas looked at Noel sympathetically. "Thanks for coming in. Chaz said, which was the polite British way of saying, "This isn't gonna work." Noel felt his heart sink. He'd failed another audition. He was going back to Folkestone, back to poverty, back to working whatever odd jobs he could find while his dream of being a professional musician died slowly. He unplugged his guitar, started putting it back in the case. This was it. Another disappointment in a long line of disappointments. Then Jimi spoke for the first time. "Wait." Noel stopped, looked up. "Ever played bass?" Jimi asked. Noel was confused. "Bass guitar?" "Yeah." "No, never. I'm a guitarist." Jimi looked at Chaz, then back at Noel. "You want to learn?" Noel didn't understand what was happening. "Learn bass? Now?" "We need a bass player," Jimi said. "We've auditioned bass players all week. They're all technically good, but they play too busy, too many notes. I need someone who can hold down the bottom end, keep it simple, let the guitar breathe. I think you could do that."
"But I don't know how to play bass," Noel said. "It's just guitar with 4 strings instead of 6, Jimi replied. "If you can play guitar, you can learn bass. Question is, do you want to?" Chaz grabbed a bass guitar from the corner, a Fender Jazz bass. He handed it to Noel. "Give it a try." Noel took the bass. It felt completely wrong in his hands. Too big, too heavy, throwing off his center of gravity. The strings were thicker than guitar strings, harder to press down. The neck was wider, the frets farther apart. He'd never held a bass before in his life, never even thought about playing one. He tried to play a simple bass line, something he'd heard on Beatles records, maybe a Paul McCartney line. It sounded terrible. Wrong notes, bad timing, awkward fingering. His guitar player's instincts were betraying him. He was trying to play it like a guitar when bass required completely different technique. "Sorry," Noel said, feeling embarrassed, feeling like he was wasting everyone's time. "I don't think I can do this. I'm a guitar player." "Try again," Jimi said patiently, no judgment in his voice. "Don't think about it too much. Don't try to be fancy. Just play something simple. 1 note per beat. Just hold down the root. That's all bass needs to do. Hold down the bottom. Give the guitar and drums something to stand on." Noel tried again. This time, he played much simpler, just hitting the root notes of each chord as they changed. 1 note per beat, like Jimi said. It still sounded rough. His timing was shaky. His tone wasn't great, but it was better. It was functional. Jimi started playing over it, a simple blues progression. And somehow, even with Noel's clumsy bass playing, it worked. The bass and guitar locked together, creating something that sounded like the foundation of a song.
They played for maybe 5 minutes. Noel was concentrating so hard he was sweating. His fingers hurt from the thick bass strings, but he was keeping up. Barely, but he was keeping up. When they stopped, Jimi looked at Chaz. "What do you think?" Chaz nodded slowly. "Good work. He's got the right attitude. Willing to learn." Jimi turned to Noel. "You want the gig?" Noel was stunned. "You're offering me the job? As a bass player? When I just told you I've never played bass before?" "I'm not looking for the best bass player in London," Jimi said. "I'm looking for the right bass player for this band. Someone who can learn, who's not going to try to show off, who can serve the song. I think that's you." "But I don't even own a bass guitar," Noel said. "We'll get you one," Chaz said. "If you want the gig, it's yours. But you need to practice. A lot. We're starting rehearsals next week." Noel stood there holding the bass, trying to process what was happening. He'd come in as a guitarist, failed the audition, and was now being offered a job as a bassist in a band with this American guitar genius. It made no sense, but it was an opportunity. Maybe his last opportunity. "Yeah," Noel said. "Yes, I want the gig." "Good," Jimi said, smiling for the first time. "Welcome to the band." That was how the Jimi Hendrix Experience got its bassist.
a failed guitarist who'd never played bass, hired on the spot, given a week to learn a completely new instrument. Noel went home that night with the Fender jazz bass Chas had loaned him, a beautiful instrument worth more than everything Noel owned. He took the train back to Folkestone, holding the bass case carefully, terrified of damaging it. He got home around midnight. His flatmate was asleep. Noel plugged the bass into his small practice amp, put on headphones, and practiced. He practiced for 12 hours straight, only stopping when his fingers literally bled. His back hurt from the weight of the instrument, but he practiced anyway. He listened to bass lines on every record he owned, trying to understand what bass players actually did. He listened to James Jamerson on Motown records, to Paul McCartney on Beatles albums, to John Entwistle on the Who tracks. He tried to copy their lines, tried to understand their note choices, their rhythmic feel, their pocket. He practiced scales. He practiced walking bass lines. He practiced until his neighbors banged on the walls complaining about the noise, then practiced more quietly with the amp turned down, then practiced some more. For the next 5 days, Noel barely slept. He called in sick to his part-time job. He ate standing up so he could keep playing. His fingers developed calluses in new places. His shoulder ached from the weight of the instrument. But he was improving, slowly, learning this completely new instrument from scratch.
1 week later, rehearsals began. Jimi had also found a drummer, Mitch Mitchell, a jazz-trained player with the speed and creativity to match Jimi's intensity. The three of them started working on songs: Hey Joe, Purple Haze, Foxy Lady. Noel struggled at first. There were rehearsals where he made so many mistakes he wanted to quit. But Jimi was patient, encouraging. Don't try to do too much, Jimi would say. Just hold down the bottom. Let the guitar and drums do the fancy stuff. Your job is to be the foundation. Slowly, Noel got better. He developed his own style, simple, melodic bass lines that supported Jimi's guitar without competing with it. He learned to leave space, to not overplay, to serve the song rather than show off. 3 months after that audition, in December 1966, the Jimi Hendrix Experience released their first single, Hey Joe. It was a hit. 6 months after that, they released Are You Experienced, one of the most influential rock albums ever made. Noel Redding, the failed guitarist who'd never touched a bass before September 1966, was now playing bass on some of the most important rock recordings in history. He toured the world, played at Woodstock, became part of rock and roll legend. Years later, after the Experience broke up and Jimi had died, Noel was asked about that audition in an interview. "Did you really never play bass before that day?" the interviewer asked.
Never, Noel confirmed. I was a guitarist. Not even a very good guitarist, as that audition proved. When Jimi asked if I played bass, I should have lied and said yes, but I was too honest, or too stupid to lie. Why do you think Jimi hired you? Noel thought about it. I've thought about that a lot over the years. I think Jimi didn't want a traditional bass player. He'd auditioned professional bass players and didn't like them because they played too much, tried too hard to be noticed. He wanted someone who would play simply, someone who didn't have bad habits to unlearn. A blank slate. And that's what I was, completely blank when it came to bass. Do you think he made the right choice? Noel smiled. The records speak for themselves. Would a different, more experienced bass player have made those albums better? Maybe. Maybe not. But Jimi had a vision for what the bass should do in his music, and because I didn't know any better, I just did what he told me. A more experienced player might have argued, might have tried to assert their own ideas. I just listened and learned. Any regrets about getting up guitar to play bass? Not even for a second, Noel said. I was a mediocre guitarist.
I became a good, maybe even great bass player because Jimi saw something in me I didn't see in myself. He saw that I had the right attitude, the willingness to learn, the humility to serve the song. Those qualities mattered more than technical skill.
The story of Noel Redding's audition became legendary in music circles. It's taught in music schools as a lesson about keeping an open mind, about potential being more important than current skill level, about how sometimes the right person for a job is someone completely unexpected. Chaz Chandler later said, "That audition is the perfect example of Jimi's genius extending beyond guitar playing. He understood people, understood what a band needed. When Noel walked in as a guitarist and couldn't keep up, most people would have just dismissed him. Jimi saw a quality in him, humility, willingness to learn, good time, and realized those qualities would make Noel perfect for what he needed in a bass player." Jimi himself rarely talked about the audition, but in one 1968 interview, he said Noel was the right choice because he listened. He didn't come in with ego about being a bass player because he wasn't a bass player. He was willing to learn, willing to try, willing to be part of something bigger than himself. That's more valuable than someone who's been playing bass for 10 years but thinks they know everything. A guitarist failed his audition and was about to leave. Jimi said, "Wait, ever played bass?" The answer was no, but Jimi hired him anyway, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience was born, one of the most influential rock bands in history, built on the foundation of a bass player who learned the instrument specifically to be in that band. Sometimes the best person for the job isn't the most experienced or the most technically skilled. Sometimes it's the person with the right attitude, the willingness to learn, and the humility to serve something greater than themselves. If this story of unexpected opportunity and unconventional thinking moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who has been told they're not qualified for something they want. Have you ever gotten an opportunity you weren't technically qualified for? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video for more untold stories of how legends found each other in the most unexpected ways.